Final ring, here I go.
All right. Welcome to the second episode of the Final Ring. Today we have guest speaker and co-host Stomps. He's a high-level competitive player. And Stomps, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you for having me, man. So I see you saying my name's Stomps. I've been a professional Apex player since the game basically came out, so that's 2.5 years now. And yeah, I am one of the only people left from those OG days, sadly. Uh,
That's
Right.
impressive, honestly. Like staying in this game for 2 years and still competing is not an easy thing to do. So hats off to you for sure.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, it's definitely been a bit of a bumpy ride for sure to get into the competitive scene. So today we're going to talk a little bit about like overarching themes are going to be team dynamics in a competitive environment, and then sort of like everything that goes into making a team a team. So let's start first, and we'll ask you, since you're our special guest, we'll ask you what are all the rules that in a team, at least in the teams that you've played on, and kind of like what do you see as their jobs in each role.
Um, this kind of varies team by team, but most teams generally have a macro IGL, which is an IGL that calls all your rotates and kind of your early and mid game actions. Um, and then you have a micro IGL and a fragger. Now, the micro IGL on a team kind of like calls all the fights and your end game stuff to kind of help your your macro IGL not get over crowded with all the thoughts and shit. So this helps them like make quick decisions and keeps the team going at a good pace in competitive matches.
So
So
so in your experience, would you say having that second IGL is almost a necessity to like playing at a high level?
well, and as I said earlier, it's not really like for every team, but definitely like most teams should have it. It is very important to a success, especially if you don't have the strongest, macro IGL on the planet. Like not
Hmm.
everybody's sweet dreams, for example, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of
So
hard to be able to call all the rotates, call all of the team fights, decide exactly what your team is going to be doing, and micromanage. So I'm sure that
exactly.
helps. And so, like, I don't know, man. I think it's when I was competing a little bit, we always had issues with IGLs and co IGLs and micro IGLs because it was very difficult to figure out like all the different dynamics within the team. And like, I'm sure that's a problem within all sorts of teams. Because I mean, as you can see, everyone's like splitting up, rejoining teams, shuffling around after every single tournament.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about this in the last podcast where, it seems like after every massive tournament, teams split up and move around and switch out players in hopes of finding, I guess, that god squad that will just run through the finals lobbies when, in reality, sometimes you got to stick together. I mean, I guess what do you think happened with your last team and what happened?
Dang. All right, we're getting to the juicy stuff already.
Yeah, juice.
So my team, we teamed for about 7 to 8 months. We didn't have the greatest starts to teaming. It took us about 2 to 3 months to even get, something rolling. Um, and this was after me and Lucas came off a playoff spot back in, I think it was the autumn circuit. I believe so. Um, so it definitely wasn't the greatest feeling, but once we started to get the ball rolling, you're kind of on that um you're on that roll, right? You're getting these consistent performances, you're placing good. Um so what happened towards our final 2 months, I'd say, of teaming, so the past 2 months, is our personalities started to clash. I wasn't, on the best terms with Lucas and Impulse. They weren't on the best terms with me. So it's more or less we just played comp together and that was it. Which can work for some teams, but for the most part, like people don't understand that on a personal level, you guys have to get along to be successful on comp.
Oh yeah, I
It's
mean, how much time are you spending together? Even just competing,
right. You're
it's gotta
putting
be
in
a
like
pretty significant portion.
8-hour days. It's like your coworkers at work, So,
Yeah.
So you're
so
saying like you guys would just get on like what once, twice, maybe 3 times a week to play scrims and then not talk to each other the rest of the time?
basically, we would talk to each other in a
Gotcha.
group chat and through
Mhm.
messages and stuff, but it was like strictly like about comp. There was nothing else involved.
There was no like, I guess, friendly banter, or just
No,
hey, you want to play this game instead of this game today, or anything
Nope.
like that?
nope. So in the last 2 months, it was just strictly business. So going into the last month for champs, um, we were very confident in making finals, which we did. Um, and so going into finals, our biggest issue came between me and Lucas in terms of IGLing. Now I'm sure you guys remember this. Our first game, we won. It was great. The vibes are
Yeah, I was
high.
hyped.
Every
Yeah, it was
Started
Yeah.
off strong, yeah.
everybody's excited. And the next game, we get like 10th with like 6 kills, I believe. It might be 4 kills. The vibes are still high. It's still a good game for us. But after that second game, it just comes crashing down. And this was something that I've always brought up, but Lucas and Impulse, when we have a bad game, most of the time they crash.
Mm-hmm.
It's and that's not me like getting onto them as individual players. They're great players, but that's basically what would happen in scenarios like that.
So it
feel
comes
like-
down to like a mentality thing almost.
Basically,
I feel like that's like a very, very popular thing in the competitive scene. It seems like, all the teams who are, very good players individually, sometimes struggle with those like finals because they get in their head and the mentality is just, we lost this game, what are we gonna do? They can't reset their mentality, and
right?
in the long run, if it messes them up.
Yeah, and I
absolutely.
mean, this goes for every game. A lot of people get their mentals down, but I think Apex is one of those special games where people shouldn't really let it get to them, mainly because you can make a bad game up in one game.
Yeah.
You can literally
Yeah,
have a
you can have
0
a bad
pointer.
5 games and have a 6 game and it's just a banger and still do okay.
Yeah,
I mean, it's a BR. Like, there's so much RNG involved that you can't expect to win every single game and, win every single fight.
yeah, exactly. So in champs, our mental kind of went down, and we started picking it back up towards the end. Of course, it was a little too late for that. So we didn't place as well for that tourney. But 2 days after the tournament, we kind of had a team discussion, kind of what went down, and they notified me in the Discord call that they were looking at a different third, which was it ended up being Rekinishu. Good player, no hate towards him, but that was kind of what ended up happening 2 days post champs. And that might become a shocker for everybody. It was a shocker to me, but it was kind of like planned for those last 2 months, as I said, with our personalities clashing. They already
Mhm.
decided that before champs.
Gotcha. Which I think, from the outside looking in, is a very almost unfair thing to do. You know what I mean? Like, for example, like when my team was competing, right? And it was Micah, Spyro, and I. Well, when we decided to look for a new third because Micah got a job, like we didn't talk to him until we'd already made up our minds. And I feel like that's something that a lot of teams do, but really could or should be avoided, right? Where
I mean, think about it. Think about it in terms of like even a workplace, right? Your supervisor or boss isn't just gonna, shouldn't just fire you on the spot, right? You should be given ample time to change what they see as a problem.
yeah.
And so
Right.
I don't know if it's necessarily specifically an esports issue, but it's definitely an issue in esports, you know?
Yeah. And some teams might handle it different and poorly. Um, but in this specific scenario, I can't necessarily blame them for bringing it up suddenly. Because you have to
Yeah.
think about it. It's 2 months before champs. You're leading up into champs. You're trying to keep the mental up or as high as you can. It's
Yeah.
like the SSG situation. You can't tell somebody, "Hey, we're looking for a different third," and expect them to be happy or okay with that, especially right before a
Right.
tournament.
Yeah,
I
there's no
feel
way.
like if you're looking for a new third before a tournament though, I think that's like I'm not trying to fire shots or whatever, but I feel like in my personal opinion, if you're looking for a new third before you even play in the tournament, you're just asking to like not perform as well as you could, right?
No,
And
exactly.
I mean, you see these teams that have dropped players after finals, right? Where if they were already planning to switch around the roster before the hand and they didn't perform as well. And
Yeah.
I think the only team that we saw, perform well with a roster change post finals was C9. And what did they get, second?
Yep, C9 got second.
Yeah, second.
Now the C9 roster
Yeah.
change though happened post champs though. That's the only difference in the
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
They didn't even consider splitting up until after champs. So I guess that's a little bit different. I could see both sides of the story when it comes to my situation. Kind of like,
Yeah.
well, you should let them know. But I don't know. I can kind of see why you wouldn't let me know beforehand.
Yeah, well, it's
Especially
just
when
asking you to have lower mental right before a tournament, which is
Yeah, and you don't want that, especially since it
not
was
what
the
anyone
biggest
wants.
Apex tournament.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
really don't want that. So it was just bad timing and a bad situation all around.
One thing I'll be interested to see is if or when lands come back, to see if the like team roster volatility comes down a bit. Because like once you've met these people and like hung out with them at lands and all that, I feel like that kind of chemistry is much easier to build in person than it is over like Discord even.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I mean, for champs, a lot of these teams flew out and boot camped with one another. Like, think of SSG, for example. SSG literally flew their players out 2 weeks before champs into a team house to kind of get that chem going. Because
Yeah.
as I was saying, like, people underrate, like, you have to personally be good with each other on a personal level,
Yeah.
It's not just esports is one of those things that's not just strictly business and you could get away with it. You have to like your teammates.
Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like it's similar in all sports. Like you'll see, I don't know, let's just use tennis as an example because it's smaller teams like in doubles and stuff. You don't really see a lot of partner switching, but you see everyone like they hang out together all the time, even if they're not playing together. And like the whole scene is kind of usually friendly with each other. And I think that's an interesting difference between regular sports and esports. Like I know in regular sports, like there are personal beefs and stuff, but I feel like on esports it's a lot easier because you're so much more anonymous.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
know?
definitely. Yeah, you don't have a face to put with people half the time. So,
I
yeah,
mean,
that's a good point.
people dislike each other because they have a similar name to someone they don't like, right? And
Yeah.
it's like, I mean, look at Clarify and Clara, right? There are people who get them confused even though they are nowhere near the same person. And
Oh, really?
it's yeah. There's like, I think there was a screenshot that's in my head that's like Clarify playing a pub and somebody saying, "Oh my God, is that Clara? Like Clara at work?"
Oh,
And this
Jesus.
guy's like, "What?" And it's like they're not even close to the same person. One competes, one's a really good streamer. It's just like it's not the same. How do you get them confused? But it happens.
Yeah.
And I think
There's
that in
because there's no
general-
real like
yeah.
yeah.
You
So I
haven't,
don't know.
like,
I think
met the
that
person, I guess.
yeah, and so I really think it'll be interesting to see what happens with the scene on a more broad scale with the return of lands. Plus, it'll be
Yeah.
fun to see all the homies.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
it'll definitely be, really good whenever fucking lanes come back. especially with all the Twitter beefs and stuff. Seeing people in person meet up, it's gonna be great.
I think
Content.
that's gonna be content in general right there. Honestly,
Hopefully it's all banter, you know.
I think it
You
would
never
be.
know sometimes.
I think that like people who have like hardcore Twitter beef, right? If they ever
Yeah.
met at a LAN or whatever, it'd just be like, "Oh hey," and then just like
Okay.
ignore each other the rest of the time. 'Cause it's like,
The passive aggressive beef.
yeah, it's like a lot of people are. I want to say like socially awkward in the gaming community. So
Yeah,
like,
I mean we're gamers. Yeah, nobody
yeah.
nobody's gonna go up to your face like, "Oh, I saw what you posted on Twitter the other day," and like, no.
How dare you subtweet me about this topic? You're
Yeah,
going down, buddy.
At least at me, buddy.
Yeah, exactly. Like nobody's gonna do that.
Yeah.
But it would be funny. Speaking of lands, though, on a little bit of a different note, we saw the EU versus NA show match, right? And I think that it was very difficult to call that representative of a competitive scene between the two regions, just because of ping, solely because of ping. I mean, not only obviously there are other reasons, but like just thinking of it in terms of like the differences in servers. What do you guys think we're going to see in lands? Like, who do you think we're going to see on top?
When it comes to predicting a team on top, that's very hard. Obviously, EU, their tier 2 and tier 1 scene are pretty close to one another. You have teams winning tournaments that you honestly would never hear of, right? But they just win these tournaments all the time. It's not like NA where it's a wild card pick. Like their scene is much better overall than every other region. But when it comes to LAN, this is just my personal opinion. You can't really predict this. I honestly think either NA or APAC is going to take home the championship.
See, I completely agree because
Yeah,
you know, EU, their pro scene is like their tier 1 and tier 2 like difference, their skill gap isn't that big, right? So like tier 2 players are, you know, competing and actually in competition with tier 1, and it's like you can't tell the difference half the time. Whereas NA, it's like you have 5, maybe 6 solid tier 1 teams that will just, you know, decimate everything. Where, you know, in EU you just don't see that. And I think that you know, I personally, like Stomp said, I think either NA or APAC comes out with a dub on LAN. All right, well, technical difficulties, but we are back. The topic we were on was like EU versus NA and who's gonna come out on LAN. We said for the most part, Stomps and I both agreed that it'd be either NA or even APAC that would come out with a dub on LAN. We think that you know, EU's tier 1 and tier 2 like skill set and skill gap isn't that far apart. Whereas, you know, you see these teams at NA like NRG or, you know, old TSM that would just dominate everybody and nobody would really stand a chance, right? So that's my prediction. Either NA comes out with a dub on LAN or APAC even, because they got some pretty nasty teams over there.
yeah, they really do. Some of those teams are quite a sight to watch.
Yep.
I agree. I think
Especially
NA is
with-
pretty top heavy.
NA's
Oh yeah,
super
100%.
top-heavy.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
It's like the teams that you see that are dominating NA right now are the teams that have been in since the start and have been consistently playing together or consistently playing in general. Where I guess we talked about this a little last time where, you know, scrims aren't the best right now for NA and haven't been the best for a while. But the people who are you know, performing very well are the people who were there from the start when scrims were, you know, what, 140 teams deep every single day.
Yeah, every day.
And,
Good old Q snipes, man.
oh yeah. But those are the teams you see that are just performing consistently and overall, you know, playing together still.
Yeah, and
Exactly.
which brings up a good point also is like, as a new player, I guess we'll direct this question specifically at Stomps, is as a new player, or to a new player rather, what would you say if they asked you how to get into competitive?
So it's funny you mentioned that because somebody literally asked me this the other day. Um, and that's a kind of a hard topic to discuss because, again, I come from when the game first came out. So for me to get into the comp scene, much easier than it is nowadays.
Yeah.
So I don't really have anything to base it off of, but from personal experience and what I've seen other people do, I would try your best. Honestly, I wouldn't even attempt scrimming or finding teams until you have connections and build those connections. It's all about connections at the end of the day for comp. As much as it sucks, skill doesn't really come. Um, Skill really isn't much of a factor when it comes to finding teams and getting that going. It mostly comes down to who you know and how they think of you as a player. So I would probably recommend like rank grinding. Honestly, try to get high ranks and
Yeah.
not non-stop connect with people and trying to play with the bigger names in the scene.
Like, who was it? It was like a Zednim, right? He kind of came out of nowhere and he was playing ranked
Well,
quite a bit and was top of ranked for a very long time.
Zenum's a good
And after
example.
that, it kind of.
Yeah, Zenum's a good example, but like mainly what I base it off of is Corey, if y'all know who that is.
I do know who Corey is because he plays with a couple people that I watch pretty
Yeah,
consistently.
he full on made champs. Think about that. Never competed before. Was always a consistent top 20 rank grinder. And he made champs with We the People in turns. That's crazy to think about. But that's how the scene works, is it's who you know.
I mean, honestly, if you're a good player, right? If you're getting, let's say, top 50 pred every season, right? If you're grinding that out and you're a solid player, then the only thing you need, like, you can fit that fragger role like we were talking about earlier, right? The only thing you really need is a strong brain that can, call rotations, that macro IGL position there. And if they're good enough at IGLing, you can make champs. Like,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. And like,
you just go ahead.
And like, with you being a hardcore fragger, let's say you just get a bunch of rank grinders together, and the team's just fragging. At that point, you build up that IGL aspect and your experience in comp. That's when you start doing it.
Well, I mean, dude, look at Solo Q or Solo Q Warlords or whatever. The EU team with Shiv and DiffQ.
Yeah.
Yes.
They did literally exactly that, and they placed. I think they placed third in champs.
Yeah, I think they placed third. Yeah, but
And-
they all,
which is just absolutely crazy to me. Like they're all gunners, all of them. Let's see.
yep.
Yeah, Solo Q Goats placed third.
They even played Bangalore,
champs.
didn't they? They didn't play
Yeah.
like meta characters. They played like what they
freaking
want to
Bangalore.
play.
Yeah.
That just proves, like, if you're good at the game and you can just, outskill everyone, it doesn't matter what you do. You're just better.
No, exactly. And people gotta also realize too, you're going to make bad plays when you're just a rank grinder in comp. Like, you're probably not going to see success for a good amount of time.
Oh yeah, your mental is just completely different. You
It's
see
too,
things differently completely. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's two completely different environments. Like, Pred ranked is nothing like competitive, but it's a good, like, first stepping stone. It's that first, like, baby step that you have to make in order to, I guess, gain that experience of competing.
exactly. And
Yeah.
it's super important, especially in a region like NA where you don't have scrims really anymore, especially
Yeah.
with these tier 1 teams. You're just not going to get experiences anywhere else besides rank.
I mean,
Right.
hot take from me here. If you are, like, struggling to get past Diamond, right? If you are struggling to get past Diamond as a ranked grinder, if you're playing ranked every day and can't hit Masters, can't hit Pred, whatever, going to sign up for a GLL tournament or, a Series E or whatever isn't really going to help you. At that point, like, I don't think that you know the game fundamentally enough to really even stand a chance to compete in, let's say a finals GLL lobby, which is, for teams that compete, like, a very, very low tier tournament, right?
Oh,
Right.
exactly.
TL, I think is considered tier 3, I
Yeah.
believe.
I mean, they host the quote unquote community tournament, what, once a week? Where
Once
it's
a week,
Wednesdays
yeah.
and Thursdays? Yeah.
Yep.
But like, I just think
I'm kind of on a different side of that. I agree with you that I don't think you'll place well in a finals lobby of GLL Cup if you're struggling passing it or getting past Diamond. But I also think that playing in GLL Cups, as long as you're taking it seriously and not like trying to grief other teams or like just running it down, is very good for improvement. I think that playing in that environment, it's like when I used to play tennis competitively, believe it or not. And I always would rather play with people or against people who are at a much higher skill level. I always saw the most improvement when I was punching above my weight class.
I can
And so,
see
like, I
that.
agree with you that it's like you won't do well, but I don't think that means that you shouldn't do it.
Well, and here's the thing though, it's like, and people also don't really think about it, is using your time wisely. And I'm kind of agreeing with Kwla here. I don't think these lower tier players should focus on doing these every week because you got to think about it. You have 2 rounds day 1 and then the finals day 2. So you're roughly putting in what, 8 hours into this tourney?
Yeah, I
Imagine
think
if
it's 8 hours.
imagine if you took those 8 hours and improved either your mechanics or your thought process in rank.
Or like this is another topic that we don't have to like get into right now, but you know, looking back at your own gameplay and reviewing what you could do better in certain situations. Like if you put 8 hours into that, you will get to masters easily. Like if you just take the time to like look back at, let's say, fights you've lost or you know, things that you could have done better as a player, I think that masters is very obtainable for anybody at the current moment in time with how ranked is I guess set up and how it's playing out.
Yeah.
No, I agree 100%. I mean, VOD reviewing is super underrated, especially for these lower tier teams.
I
mean,
completely agree with that.
yeah. But also a big thing with VOD reviewing is it can hurt you if you don't know like what you
What
want to
you're
look
looking
for.
for.
Yeah, specifically, or recognizing that a situation went wrong because of a whole different thing you thought of. You know,
Well, if you're,
like
yeah, I mean, I think, yeah. And again, if you're trying to get in competitive, maybe considering like a coach or an analyst
I was about to say, yeah,
for that kind of thing.
if you're serious about getting into competitive and you're like this, I guess late, which you're not really late in the game overall, but it's like there's not really the same opportunities there were, you know, a year and a half ago. Definitely
just
finding, yeah, definitely finding someone who has experience to, you know, reach out to them to, you know, I guess you could hire them as a coach for, you know, a couple hours a week or whatever to just have them there to VOD review with you or to take a look at you and your team's gameplay and kind of go over what went wrong, I think would be absolutely massive for anyone who is seriously trying to get into the scene.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think taking that part seriously is very important too. Like making sure you have a set schedule of when you're going to do this. And so like you hold yourself accountable to review and having that time with your coach and the rest of your team.
I guess that could
Exactly.
come like after, because we were talking about earlier how like, you know, you should at least be able to hit a certain rank, blah blah blah. Like,
Yeah.
I think that would be in the transition of, you know, you've hit masters, you've hit pred now, you wanna start, you know, seriously fixing the little problems you might have, right? So the small positioning errors from you, blah 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 blah. I think that's where a coach or an analyst could really shine and take you from like a you know, a masters player to a top, you know, 500, top 250 pred.
no, and I agree.
Yeah,
The
absolutely.
only issue with coaching, and especially in Apex, is a lot of these free agent teams don't have a backing of an org to pay a coach. I mean,
Yeah.
some coaches will do like $20 for an hour or something like that, which is fine, but you're not going to get a lot of the benefits of a coach in just 1 hour. So
Exactly. Yeah.
I think this kind of goes back to VOD reviewing. I think the most beneficial thing some teams could even do is just review tournament gameplay from pros and realize the decision making that they're going through. Now, once you start having issues and you're like once you start actually doing comp and you're in these ALGS tournaments and you're getting like round 2'd or something like that, and you want to start recognizing what went wrong, and if you're serious about competing, at that point, I'd recommend a coach for a lot of these teams.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
I agree
totally
with
fair.
that.
I guess I didn't really think about the financial aspect of having a coach, right? Because I think I've always seen it as like you'll find someone that again, networking, who's willing to
Yeah.
help out your team,
Exactly. Well, the one thing with coaching too is it takes a lot of time. So even if you're friends with somebody, it's most of the time they're not going to do it for free.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, even behind the scenes, like as somebody who has coached, it's not just hey, I'm gonna watch this video with you for an hour and a half and tell you what you can do better. It's like, 4 hours a day type of deal every single time they scrim or every single time something goes off. You're analyzing where other teams are landing. Even like for finals, it was like I was watching their I guess champ scrims, right? And we would sit there and like I would watch the entire VOD of their champ scrims while they're playing, and then I would go back after, find places that like I wanted to talk to them about, write them down on a notepad. Next day we'd go back, I'd pull those up, have everything on a notepad and say like, tomorrow I want you to try this instead, and have that whole like thought process of maybe you can test this team instead of running from this team, or maybe instead of rotating here you do this. And it's like, it's not just, an hour. It's not just that. So finding someone to, I guess, coach without paying them, or just relying on, hey, me, can you do this for me type of deal, like that's really hard to, I guess, expect from someone.
No,
absolutely.
exactly.
It's
And
like,
that's why it's like saying like you need to be more invested in comp. Like once you recognize you can actually do it, your team's just struggling in certain aspects, that's when you should probably start looking into like getting a coach.
so I guess then we should. I want to look at how you would get from point A of becoming a Masters player to point B, recognizing that you have the skill and the team chemistry to make it into these top lobbies.
Well, I mean, probably the
Without
easiest way.
without a coach, yeah.
The easiest thing is once you recognize you can actually compete is probably whenever you're just decimating these pro teams in rank. And I mean, and the pro teams aren't playing at their highest capabilities. I mean, it's rank Apex, like you don't have Imperial Howl playing it like it's a $500,000 attorney. It's not happening.
That is one thing that like I feel like a lot of players don't understand or don't realize, because you'll be like a Diamond 4, maybe a Masters player, right? Just because you kill TSM Imperial Howl doesn't mean you're good enough to compete against him, right? Most of the time when he's playing ranked, they're just like W keying, just playing for content and playing for not very serious, right?
Yeah, it's just fun for him.
That's something that a lot of players I don't think realize, that just because you kill them does not mean that you're better than him. And I've seen a lot of, I want to say, weird egos come up from players who are, they haven't competed, they haven't had that experience, but they're like, oh, I kill this person all the time in ranked, so I must be good enough, or I must be better. And it's like, that's just, I would recommend, back to the networking thing, like dropping any sort of ego that you have. And I know some people are going to say that's funny coming from me, but listen, okay, seriously, do not have an ego whatsoever, and you'll make it farther than if you have one.
Yeah, no, ego's definitely a big thing here. I mean, because you want to make friends with these pros, because they're going to help you network the most.
Exactly.
They're going to get you out to audiences. They're going to get you out to other players. And if you're friends with them, they'll help you out even more so then you're just trash talking Imperial Hell in this chat.
That's another thing I'll say. Like, if you are able to stream your gameplay, 100% do it, right? Even if you are like, not interacting with chat that much, blah, blah, blah. If you are just 100% streaming every single time you play the game, you'll still have more potential to make those connections than if you weren't streaming, for example, right?
So I easily agree there. Most people, though, like, they don't have this setup to stream. And that's just because Apex is a hard game to stream.
Yeah, no, I get
Apex
that.
Apex is very poorly optimized, and so it's like one of those games that you kind of have to have a $9,000 setup to stream sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have a
Especially
dual
if you
PC setup, and even sometimes it still gives me issues. Like, Apex is just one of those games that it's very hard to keep a stream consistently running.
Even without streaming, like on my i7 with a 2070, like or i7 7700K with a 2070, it's like my game will still drop to like 50 FPS in scrim sometimes, and it's like that's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's miserable.
Yeah,
and the stutters are pretty bad. Like,
at least one thing I will say, it's better than Watson meta, because Watson meta I was literally at like 25 to 30 frames the entirety of endgame.
all the fences,
Watson,
dude.
Dude, that shit. It was so bad. It was so bad.
As fun and competitive as Watson meta was, like all of the fences and all of the like pylons and all of the everything, it was just like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was miserable for anybody who didn't have a $4,000 PC.
Oh, for sure.
But I think we kind of deviated from the main topic point there, which was these teams and kind of recognizing when they're ready to compete. And I think the biggest thing is you need a set squad for rank, right? You just need to play nonstop rank with this set squad to build a consistent team going into competitive.
Yeah.
But the biggest factor in recognizing you can actually compete is you're getting pred every season. You're getting somewhat deep into pred. I'd probably say top 250 pred. And you can nonstop take 3v3s with these pro players. Not just third party kill them, but straight up 3v3s. And that's
take
when
ISO 3vs.
Yeah, and that's when you should recognize I can actually do this professionally if I, sit down, take the time, and learn. Because mechanics in this game, and this is more so than any other game, like CS, knowledge is more important than mechanics. Mechanics are so much more important in this game than like 100%. Being a smart player.
If you have good mechanics, they can carry you through a lot of this game. Like if you are just purely skilled, right? If you are just talented and you got a beam, you're gonna go at least somewhere, right?
Yeah. And the biggest and
plus the knowledge can be learned
and this is
much more easily.
And real quick, this is no diss to a player, but Nathan's the perfect example of this. Nathan is the most mechanical, like gifted player in this game.
Yeah.
And you can argue he's the best comp player due to that. But have you ever seen Nathan IGL or make calls? No.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's kind of realized his place as like, I'm not my skill set or my talents aren't towards the IGL or the brains of the team. It's much more of the when you need me to clutch up, I will clutch up 90+% of the time.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's also pretty important too for like newer players to recognize is what role they fit into a team. Mm-hmm. Are they always out fragging their teammates? Are they able to recognize certain situations? Like if you're not out fragging everybody on your team, you should probably start looking things from like analyzing an IGL perspective. Yeah.
And that kind of ties into character meta as well, right? So you have the fraggers on your team, they shouldn't be playing Gibby. In all reality, if you're going to have a fragger on your team, you should probably have them playing like an Octane or a Wraith or one of those mobility characters where they can really, perform. Even Bloodhound, you know what I mean? Where they can really perform and outshine everybody on the team, and they have that potential.
I agree. I think your Wraith and Octane players though is kind of your
Could be
main IGL.
Yeah.
Your main
It
idea.
should always be your main IGL because they're the ones who are going to rotate you into certain spots, and an IGL has to be quick with what they want to do. So you can't be a Gibby going, oh, we should rotate here, and wait for your
Yeah.
teammate to be like, okay, let me throw a pad. It can't work that way. And
Instead, it's just me take my pet now.
yeah,
kind
and
of
this is where you kind of differentiate the macro and micro IGL. I'm a Gibby main, but I do micro IGLing. So I'll call fights and all of that. But you'll never see me go, oh, I need a pad here. We gotta start rotating. I won't do that. I will leave that up to the Octane player. But your fragger most of the time's Bloodhound because let's be honest, wall hacks on a fragger, insane.
the way.
It's pretty strong.
It's there's nothing that compares to it, especially with this ult where you're basically an Octane stim 24/7. It's
Plus, you have those red targets, where they're just glow.
everybody's highlighted like
They're
it's a
singing-
digi.
You can see those
Yeah, it's
crazy pixel peak angles that they're taking, and
Exactly. And I guess that could be another thing too for teams to recognize is which characters they strongly perform on and which characters they struggle with. Especially for newer players, because everybody that's played the game for a while now already knows how to play everything.
yeah,
I can go from Gibby to Bloodhound easily. I could go from Bloodhound to
Yeah.
Octane easily.
yeah.
Just because I've played the game. Like I have over 4,000 hours in it,
You kind of have that mentality of what to do with this character, even if you haven't mastered the character.
Exactly. And so
Yeah.
that's something for newer players too, is picking a character, recognizing your role, and sticking to it nonstop until you mastered it. And then you can kind of start to theory craft other
Or
characters.
flex a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
I think going back a little bit to the macro IGL thing, or the macro IGL role, and them calling rotates. And so I guess I wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between early game rotates and late game rotates. And so who on you? I guess on your team, who called the different rotates? Early game, late game. Was it the same person, or did you have maybe somebody else calling late game rotates? Because I know
So-
when I was competing, our main IGL would call everything up until about zone 4. And then we had the micro IGL who's playing on Bloodhound. They would be the ones making the late game calls just because they had a better mind for it. And it had nothing to do with the first person. It was just they were better at making these decisions. And so we had two different people calling late game and
Mhm.
early game rotates.
Endgame kind of comes down to who had the most experience playing in these types of lobbies and who's more comfortable and assessing situations that come in endgame. But with my team, we had Lucas call basically every rotate until zone 4. What his IGLing was is he would want a spot depending on the zone pool, and we would prioritize that spot whether we had to fight a team or not. And if we didn't get that spot, then it would kind of fall on the micro to kind of come up with a backup plan. Just so you kind of have two ways, about going about a situation.
Right.
But the micro IGL, their whole role is just to get you in zone and get you in a spot that's going to allow you to get kills and good placement. When it comes into the later stages of the game, if your macro IGL is comfortable, I'd probably say leave it to them. But if they're not super comfortable and they don't have a lot of experience, that's where the micro comes in. And that's when, for example, me, there'd be a lot of times in game I'd call rotates, especially as a Gibby player with my bubble.
Yeah, you can make those short rotates pretty safely.
I can make those short rotates. I can also position us in a way for a fight. So that's kind of where I excelled in for my team.
When I competed, we had I hard called everything, right? So I was just IGL. There wasn't macro micro IGL. It was just I called every rotate, everything, and then when it came down to end game, Micah would kind of call where to look for like fights and look for picks. Well, I was planning those like late game, like, okay, if this happens, then we go here, and if this happens, we go here. But for the most part, like, everything was on me, and I will say it's pretty stressful if you do it for a long time. But that way, there was no questions about it, right? Because I feel like that's something that a lot of teams struggle with. If you have a macro and a micro IGL, if they disagree on something, who really has the final say? And unless you've like talked about it and said like, if I call this and you call this, we're gonna go with this option. And
right.
Unless you've talked about that, you're gonna have that issue, I feel like.
No, definitely. So whenever we originally started teaming, me and Lucas butted heads a lot because there'd be fights he'd call and I would call at the same time. And due to him being a macro IGL, I would think, okay, he's trying to position us for something else. And so we'd go with his call, and it, there was a lot of clashing.
Yeah.
So I think for teams, once that starts to happen, it's important to sit down, and it's okay to get onto one another. Like, realize your role on the team.
Yeah.
Like, your job, let's say you're micro, your job is to call fights. When it comes to rotates, that is me. You know?
Yeah.
And it's also important, like, recognizing what your team wants to prioritize, whether it be these kills or placements, because that can also change your argument too.
I think that, back on to like new players trying to get in the game. I know we talked about it a while ago, but if you look at teams like TSM, right? If you look at teams like TSM, and you're thinking that they hate each other and that Hal is constantly yelling at Snipe Down and it's just beef between them, that's just how competitive it is, right? If you're an IGL and you call something and somebody doesn't listen to you and it gets you killed, you're going to snap at your teammates. You're going to snap at your friends, right? And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize, that there's never any beef between people. It's all love at the end of the day. Just in that moment where you're like, why did you do this? I called this. Like, why didn't you listen to my IGL call? It's like, that's something that just happens out of like the heat of the moment almost.
Exactly. Well, and that's the thing with esports, is it's people are wanting to take it like a job. You could compare it to kind of like a real world job where, if you get told to do something by your boss and you don't do it, what's your boss going to do?
Yell at you, get mad at you. Yeah.
He's going to get mad at you because it needed to get done and you didn't do it.
So get that nice little slap on the wrist warning there.
Yeah. So, and eventually you're going to get fired if you continue not doing your job. So that's where like roster changes too can happen. But yeah, it's just big for people to recognize that it's not all hatred at the end of the day. Like, everybody has the same goal when they're competing. They want to win. It's just what's going to put you in the best spot to win that people got to try to recognize.
And I think that, if you are coming to the scene, don't take what other people are saying about you or to you personal, right? Like,
100%. You know how many people hate me in this scene?
Likewise, like the same. Like, it is. There are people that I've never talked to, never personally played with, or never even like, met, that are just like, I don't like you because this person doesn't like you even. And it's like,
oh yeah,
that's another one of those things where kind of keeping to yourself and, just being cool with everybody comes into a big play about networking.
Yeah. And this is something too, because I've competed since the game came out. I still get ego to this day. I made full-on champs finals, and I'm being egoed for my LFT situation. Think about that. There are teams that didn't even make champs that ego me.
I saw this really funny post from Moo, and he was in an LFG Discord, and as you know, Moo used to compete. He was former Pred, blah blah blah. But this guy was like, how many times have you been Predator? He's like, oh, I was Pred 2 seasons. He's like, that's not enough. And they were like back in the day, so you're not even good anymore. I'm not playing with you. And I was like,
which is crazy because Moo is like insanely talented.
No, exactly. Yeah, there are players that are like insane at the game that just get egoed for no reason. And
No,
You know, just-
exactly.
It's wild.
Moose situation is actually very interesting because he's having to fight against his past too.
Yeah.
Because I mean, as you know, I'm sure he was not like the easiest dude to be around early on, and like he's gotten so much better, but he's having to fight now against like the things he did in the past because
Exactly.
which has got to be tough too. And it almost feels like no one's giving him a chance either, just because of like what happened years ago or a couple years ago at
Exactly.
this point.
Well, the thing too is like, and Apex is one of the special games where it's like this, where if you leave and come back, you basically start at square one. You are
Mhm.
Yeah,
you are back
Yeah.
at networking, making friends, getting high ranks. You are back at square one. And so while it's super unfortunate for me, man, and I feel bad for the guy because he is a really good player. You're back at that stage of, okay, I got to prove myself again.
Oh yeah, and he knows that too. And it's really weird. It's just and that's what I'm saying. In my opinion, it's just kind of a really interesting situation in general. It's just
Well, I'm just talking from like the standpoint of, let's say, a ranked player that has just hit Masters for the first time, egoing someone who has, been pred multiple times when, in my opinion, ranked was actually competitive, right? And, you
season
might
one,
agree
season
with
two,
this,
It actually
you
mattered.
might not agree with
Yeah.
this, but in my opinion, the Season 1 pred badge, most important badge to have out of every single badge in the game, right? Especially on PC, because every single game was full of pro teams playing like pro teams for the win.
Dude, stop.
Yeah.
In season 1, I was fucking diamond.
Hey man,
Stop.
listen. Drush. I mean, even though even though there's not that hard cap of 750 preds, right? It was if you got past 1,000 RP, you were pred. I still think that is more impressive than being 750th pred now in the current season.
No, and I
Well,
agree.
the rank system itself was just different.
Well, yeah, there wasn't assists. Every point you wanted to get, you had to get from kills.
There was no assist. There was only KP. But the big factor too was kind of the meta back then. It wasn't an aggression meta. It was Path Watson. That was the meta. So ranked games ended up playing out like scrims, and you also had a different tier of players. Over time, as Apex has been, growing in its esports scene, and this is no diss to anybody, but the skill level of players has declined almost. Think about it back in the day when you had.
It has, but I wouldn't blame the players. I would blame the way the devs have been balancing the game.
No, 100%. But it's also like Apex is one of those games where you're having people who've never competed before trying to come in, and I think that's the biggest factor. Whenever the game first came out, you had people switching from H1 PUBG. They already had BR knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And
now you're having people from that just play COD for fun on their free time.
Yeah, you have people coming from like Final Fantasy going, I'm gonna go pro in an FPS. Like it's hard. It really is.
And I mean, I think going off of that, the skill gap has just widened so much, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that in season 1, overall, the skilled players of pred to diamond or whatever was much closer than it is now. Because I think as a pro player or a pred player, you can solo through diamond and 1v3 teams consistently. You know what I mean? And back then, that was just absolutely not a possibility.
No, definitely. I think for how the scene is shaped out is the top end is much bigger than what it was back then. I mean, back then you had TSM winning every tournament. It felt like
5 times.
It felt like it literally happened. They won every tournament.
Yeah.
But nowadays you have teams like NRG, CLG, Complexity. You have more top end teams.
Yeah.
But the lower tier teams, and I'll even diss myself, we're not at the top end level, But we are considered like tier 1 players to an extent.
Yeah.
But
this is kind of something we were talking about last time, is like, how do you become a tier 1 player or a higher level player if the tier 1 teams aren't scrimming, but at the same time, why would they scrim if they're so much better than all the rest of the teams that are scrimming? You know?
No, I agree. At that point, though, it just comes down to keep your head down and grind. Like, this comes down to what I said earlier. The game's mostly about mechanics. If you can mechanically be insane, you can figure out all that other stuff later. You don't need scrims to gain knowledge on how to beat some of these teams. You can literally just go back and watch tournament VODs and realize how they played every situation out. Because scrims
Right.
and Apex, honestly, the only benefit you get from them is learning how to rotate.
Yeah. Well,
And if you go ahead,
I guess talking about that, like learning how to rotate in scrims and stuff, being able to differentiate like a grief and a contest as well is something that you could learn from scrims. Because if you're straight up griefing someone, right? If you are like landing on them, taking out their loot, rotating, like that's something you don't want to do, right? And I think that's something
It's a good way to get blacklisted.
Yeah, that's a good way to find a lot of beef in the community. I will say people like their drop spots, but
Yeah, which maybe you want if you're unknown, you know. Who knows?
Hey, I mean, this is gonna be a terrible example, but look at Tech, right? Tech was, you know, I want to say a nobody until he contested TSM and, you know, what looked like a complete grief on anybody outside and looking in because TSM was running the tournament, really. But he contested him kind of, I don't know, griefed. That's a weird situation. At the end of the day, though, it happened. TSM was like, you know, good job, GG's, whatever. And now, you know, as a controversial name, Tech is still known throughout the community.
Exactly, it's one of those any publicity is good publicity type scenarios.
Yeah.
no, I agree. The
But
thing
in
with
terms
contest,
of like competitive integrity, oh, sorry, continue.
no, I was like the thing with contest is like being able to recognize what's griefing or like a contest is does it impact your game contesting them? Like, are you going to lose the game contesting for a specific drop spot? And this is why I would consider Tech borderline griefing because you're contesting TSM of all teams. This was when they were in their prime. You know?
They were winning the tournament.
They were winning the tournament.
Those last two games where they had to fight for, you know, what limited loot they already have because they played early rotate there. And, you know, it messed up their rotations. It messed up their loot. And even if Tech, you know, lost the fight and died, TSM is still rotating late with less loot, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, I would consider it a grief too. But that's in my opinion. It happened. It's like...
Yeah. I think in that situation, the only time it wouldn't be considered a grief if the exact same scenario happened is if Tech's team had been like in second place.
Yeah, weren't they in like 18th or something as well?
Yeah. So if there's no chance you're going to win the tournament, late contesting a team, in my opinion, is a grief. Straight up.
I would only contest in scrims. Like I wouldn't even bring contests to a tournament almost because if you bring it into a tournament, that is hardcore griefing.
I mean, but sometimes you can't really do anything about it, though, right? Because, like, if in champs you have group stages and you have finals, and so the teams in group stages might not have your drop spot, but maybe a team in finals does. What do you do at that point? You know?
Well, at that point, you still have those. Whenever there was group stages and finals, you still had scrims in between both of those. You could contest in scrims to kind of get, like, or see who's going to get that drop spot come finals time.
I mean, yeah, if you're, you know, rolling a team in those scrims, or if they're rolling you, you know, if you're losing, let's say 3 out of 5 games or whatever, majority of your games, you should probably look for a different drop spot. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
I think that's just on like the confidence of the players, I guess, where it's like, or the ego of the players where it's like, no, this is my drop spot. I don't care how many times I'm going to lose it. I'm still going to fight you for it.
This is my swamp.
I mean, hey, I will admit I used to do the same thing because, you know, when we competed, we controlled like the entire back half of the map where like Dome is, like that entire area was where we landed, and if anybody landed anywhere near them, we would completely ruin our game in scrims to make sure they didn't land there, right? And kind of what Complexity does over by Epicenter, where you're landing there, and if anybody's anywhere near you, you're just going to push them right off the bat and kill them. And, they might not land there because that's just throwing at that point.
They don't want to get pushed and killed and lose all their games. Yeah.
But I think there's a difference between doing that in scrims and doing that in an actual tournament. If you're doing that in a tournament, you're doing something wrong.
No, I agree. And great point to bring up is how Complexity played out come group stages of champs. They were being 50'd for their survey and refinery. And, I was in their lobbies, but they weren't streaming. I can't say this is exactly what they did, but I would assume that they pushed those teams.
Yeah.
Because they were being 50'd.
I think they did.
Well, I can tell you they did because as, the AM coach, we landed refinery and got pushed almost every game. We had to leave within 45 seconds to a minute and be gone with everything full looted and whatever we had. Otherwise, they were chasing us down. And there was one game that we rotated through tunnel to Skyhook, and they chased us from survey camp all the way through Skyhook, all the way over by Trials and Countdown area where they finally killed us. They chased us that entire time, like without rotating, just to kill us.
Yeah, just to keep you from dropping there. Again,
And
I mean, that's a big thing. I mean, that's okay doing that in scrim. So it's just come turning time. It really ended up, in my opinion, probably costing them champs.
When it came to actual tournament time, at least from the AM perspective, we decided to drop somewhere else when Complexity was in our lobby, right? Because we knew that they were going to play like that. And, I wonder how many other teams decided to do that so they don't... I guess Complexity really relies on getting that almost early KP or just a KP heavy team in general. So if...
they're arguably the best edge team in the game at the time. Yeah.
So if you take away their potential to get kills, that's where they have struggles getting to finals. And as we've seen, they didn't qualify for one reason or another. None of them are streaming, so we can't really go back and analyze why. But, if you take that potential away from them, as you can see what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. You can definitely see the effects of taking away an edge team's ability to get early kills and then...
And I know we're kind of like on a little bit of a time squeeze here. So I'm going to kind of wrap up this topic for you guys and kind of give my last opinion on the difference between a contest and a grief, which is don't land somewhere, take half the loot and run away. That grief's not only your game, but the team's game.
100%.
If you're going to contest, even if you have bad loot, you kind of just have to fight it out. That way, the teams kind of get the loot that they're missing, no matter what.
And I will say, as like a final thought from me, at least, where as if you're looking to compete as a new player coming into competitive, make sure you are able to fight and use any gun, like P20, RE, whatever you have. Make sure you're able to use it, at least to, you don't have to be an amazing player with it, right? But at least be able to hit your shots and win a fight with it, no matter what it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, in Mozambique, somebody knows how to use it.
Yeah.
I mean, Mozambique's the new wingman. That thing hits.
It's really good. Yeah.
Purple bullet on Mozambique.
Look at people like Hal. I think Hal does this when he warms up in firing range before he does anything else. It's like he uses no attachments on anything, even during 1v1s and stuff like that, just to get used to not having anything.
Well,
that's important.
There was a quote from Hal that every pro player knows / agrees with. It's like a barrel stabilizer will not change the outcome of a game, right?
Yeah, exactly.
If you can't aim without a purple barrel stabilizer, you shouldn't be at the position, where you're competing anyway.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
It's one of those things that when you play early rotates, having no attachments on a gun is very common. Having a base wingman, a base R9, and white armor is very common for an early rotate team.
Right. Yeah. So let's move this on to a final topic. Let's talk about where we think competitive Apex is going, what kind of a future it has, especially considering the fact that LANs could be coming back.
It's going down the drain. No, I'm just kidding. No, Apex is honestly, it's going to start thriving here soon, and you're seeing that with a lot of orgs coming back. Hopefully, here soon in the season 2 of ALGS, you're going to see a return of Lance. I mean, there's been a few leaks of it already happening, but nothing official yet. But Lance would be massive for this game, and I think we're also going to start getting bigger prize pools with EA recognizing that this could honestly blow up their esports division.
See,
yeah, I just hope it helps them balance the game and fix the cheater problem.
yeah,
right?
I was about to say, as much as I agree with that, it really lands on the backs of, I guess, EA and Respawn, right? Because personally, what I'd like to see happen, I know a bunch of other pros would agree, is separate rule sets for competitive and public match playlists.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
We talked about that, and I agree wholeheartedly.
I think if they were to do that and make balancing based off of, professional outcomes and professional stats for the competitive scene, whereas, pubs, whatever, it's for fun, it doesn't matter. If those separated, I think that the competitive scene would thrive, and scrims would return much better than they are right now.
I agree.
Well, they could even do
to
a
an
competitive build versus a public build on the game itself.
Yeah,
They can. And I agree to an extent. I mean, we know customs are coming out to the public relatively in the next few months. They already kind of spoiled that one. But the biggest issue, and we kind of were discussing this with, new teams, how are they going to get adjusted, is rank. It's almost hard in a game like Apex where you don't have scrims running every day for teams, or not even for teams, but for EA to justify a competitive build separated from the game with different rule sets and different loot pools and all of that. So it's a super touchy subject. I don't think it's like an easy
it's
you
not
can
an
look
easy
at.
solution at all. I'll agree with that, but I
I mean,
feel
if
like
it was, I would have done it already.
exactly.
You know?
And it's funny that you mentioned custom lobbies being available to everyone. I wonder what type of gate kept scrims are going to happen in that scenario, right? Where
Nobody's going to be able to play tier 1s. That's new.
I mean, yeah, no, I mean, I completely agree with that and support that. But I'm wondering how, that tier 2 to tier 1 leap, how that's going to play out. Like what gets you an invite to those custom lobbies?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely going to be
unless it's hosted by a third party, there's no shot. You have to become friends with somebody in a tier 1 lobby. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to get in.
Connections. I mean,
yeah,
back to the same thing.
Connections. That's what makes esports. But no, I mean,
sorry, go for it.
I was like, you already kind of have players like Minus Tempo who are currently running a league at the moment that's similar to scrims. And I feel like most of the pro scene's okay with somebody like that hosting these scrims. And it's like Battalion back in the day, with the Q snipes. The pros didn't run their own Q snipes. There was talks of them doing it, but
I mean, the thing with Battalion back in the day, and Apex.pro and 2-1 Apex, whatever, is there was always a public ran scrim, and then there was a private ran scrim where you had to have, you had to win a season of the public ran open scrims to be invited to the private scrims.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And there was a clear path on how to get there, right? So I feel like as long as there's a clear path from tier 2 to tier 1 or even tier 3 to tier 2, it's going to be, I think the Apex scene will thrive. I think the competitive scene will start to take off.
Yeah, it's just the lack of pipeline organization, and EA is refusing to take a pretty like active role in organizing the competitive scene, which is kind of unfortunate. But I completely agree. I think that if we see these pipelines created, the competitive scene itself will just blow up.
I mean, with GLL, for example, right? GLL, or so I've heard, has to have an all-inclusive type build to run scrims, right? Like, they have to have every single person included, and it has to be open for anybody to sign up and join. And that's how, as far as I know, EA wants scrims to be ran. The only issue with that is, as you can see, there's such a big difference between tier 1 players and, you know, casual players, or, you know, the gold 4 requirement or whatever. It's just, it's not even worth playing in them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and GL just kind of mainly lacks though in like structure into separating these teams. Right now, it's just what it was before, you know, they stopped running scrims. It was just first come first serve, who signed up first.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, pretty much.
So I definitely think with customs coming public, it would be massive having now that new way of hosting these scrims.
Yeah, and it'll be, you know, free market economy just for scrims. Whoever has the best scrims will get the
Whoever
most
has the
people
most clout will be able to host scrims. That's just how it's gonna work. I see PvP hosting them. I'm gonna call that right now. I see PvP hosting the tier 1 scrims, where, you know, people might have an issue because of, you know, conflict with, you know, him being a coach for Cloud9 and everything, but I see he's in the position, I think, to kind of have all those connections to where he's going to be the main person in front of it.
I could see that. From personal experience, I think minus Tempo is going to be the one who ends up running the scrims.
Yeah, I could see that too.
Because, I mean, he hosted all the champ stuff, like all the scrims for that, and everybody loved it.
Yeah.
So I could see.
As long as
PvP
scrims come back,
doing it.
I'm happy for it. I'm good with it.
Yeah, as long as scrims come back and the scene gets healthier, the players get better.
As long as the NA scene actually does something, yeah, I'm okay with it. So
yeah.
Well,
It's like the whole
I think that's
Go for
about all the time we have. I mean, if you guys have any last, you know, comments, concerns, whatever, I think we should go ahead and talk about it.
Got everything out there.
I'm good. Follow my Twitter.
Hey, yeah. The Twitter ads are below our webcams or our borders here. So follow Stomp. He's on Twitter. Follow Zoro TGB on Twitter.
I'm low on impressions. Come give me followers.
Facts.
And for anyone who's in competitive looking for a cracked Gibby, your boy Stomps is still looking, I think.
Free agent. Hit him up.
Hey, we're testing stuff out. All right. Stuff's in the works.
Listen, if you want to compete, all right, DM Stomps and be like, hey, I need a Gibby. All right. Tell him Kwla sent you. He'll accept it. I promise. All right. Anyway. Well, I think that has been the ending for number 2 of the final ring. Stomps, thanks for joining us and being the guest on today's show.
Yeah, man. Thank you for having me.
It's great,
having
time. You. And
yes,
yeah, we'll see y'all next time.
See y'all next time.
Later.